Good morning. Well, good afternoon by the time I post this. Let me just tell y'all, I was not supposed to talk to you all this morning. In fact, I was not supposed to make another video until next week because I was suffering from a little bit of a vulnerability hangover. Let me explain what that means. A couple years ago, when Brene Brown was still someone that people liked, quoted, she was the belle of the ball when it came to talking about authenticity and vulnerability, and her books about it and her talks about it were all over the internet, super viral. I think she fell out of favor with people during 2020 when people were really purity washing how certain public figures showed up in public when it came to discussing certain things. Now I look back at 2020 and I'm like, everybody was doing better than the shit we got going on now. But anyway, and I'm not talking about like with COVID and stuff. I'm talking about the way people were at least trying to show up and trying to get better and trying to be better at talking about certain things. It seemed like nobody was. Anyway, we're not going to talk about that. It's a whole nother subject. But Brene Brown definitely isn't spoken of or thought of as highly now as she was back then. But back then, she was everywhere, and she was talking about vulnerability, and she was talking about how there's so much strength in it, and how it's the way that you escape from your shame, how we all have a shame story, et cetera, et cetera. And I think I was really, really inspired by these conversations when I started doing the internet. I think I rose up in a time where people were being more vulnerable and more open. And I want to make it clear, I don't think vulnerability is just, telling traumatic events that have happened to you. But I think a lot of us, that's when we feel the most vulnerable, right? I could be telling a story about the first date with my greatest love and feel really vulnerable because of all the extensive and immense emotions it could bring out of me. I could be telling a story about going to see my student perform at a recital, and that could make me feel vulnerable because of all the time I invested in them and the routines we went over, et cetera, et cetera. But I think for a lot of people around 2020, 2021, vulnerability became short code for sharing my painful business, sharing my shame story, and not being afraid to put it out there. I see this a lot. Even now, people will say, they want content creators to show their authenticity. And they will show us a video of their house teeming with roaches. I'm a real mom. And there's piles of clothes and dirt everywhere. I'm just showing y'all how it really is. And then you get into conversations about, should you be sharing that, or is that the kind of thing that should actually stay offline? And Brene Brown talked about this too. She talked about how not everyone has earned the right, deserves the right, or even knows what to do with the right to hear your shame story. Not everybody is your audience. And then she said, you gotta watch for sharing too much, because then you might experience a bit of a vulnerability hangover. And I really thought she meant metaphorically. It's something that happens to you mentally. You just realize, whoa, I've shared too much. Like that feeling, right? But actually, going into the end of October, I started to really feel hung over. And by the time I pressed publish on my last episode of Love Unsolved, I had a headache that was going from here to here. I was exhausted. It felt like I had been up for 90 days and 90 nights. I don't know. And I was like, I really feel hung over. And I was trying to understand, what did I do? How did I get to this point? And I realized, I've been going back in time and I've been digging up all of these experiences. Now, some I wasn't really, it wasn't no thing. Like I told a story about a man that went missing when he went on a bike ride to Tijuana, and somebody wrote in the comments, "Don't torture yourself like this. He just found someone else." And I was like, torture myself? No. I'm being dramatic for the video. Like, I don't think about this man. I don't care about him. And he actually seemed kind of lame. And so it was a surprise. If you saw that episode, it was a surprise when he went missing. But I'm good. I'm all right, but it was after I posted my last episode when I talked about the friendship breakup that happened in the breakup house. If you watched that, that's when I had to go back and touch on some really painful memories, some things that I had pushed down. And it's not even just about the house, also about that time in the life of that friendship. And that's an important note for me to bring up today, because I'm going to be talking about boyfriends and male partners and the modern day perception of their necessity and their impact on your life, and how a lot of people are now convincing themselves that, especially a lot of heterosexual women, they're convincing themselves that they're better off without these relationships and they need to pour more into their female friendships. And as someone who has been through some almost violent friendship breakups, and not violent in that we battled, fist fought, but in what happened before they broke apart, how it made me feel, I'm going to tell you, a friendship breakup, a female friendship going bad, whatever, can be just as devastating to your life as a bad boyfriend. But there's a reason why we tend to put one on a pedestal and leave one, and we're trying to decenter the other one, right? But anyway, long story short, I felt like shit after I posted that last episode, and I was like, okay, Stephanie, you got to take like a week off. And then randomly, I decided to become a media scholar, and I was talking about the whole Southern fried rice thing. And I couldn't just say, my piece. I had to go and find vintage videos. And actually what's interesting about that video that I posted is that I posted that for free. YouTube is not paying me for that because I got a copyright strike because of one of the videos I used. And I was trying to post late in the midnight hour, and I was like, I don't have the energy to go in, take that out, find something else. Like, just post it. Being a creator who uses vulnerability as a brand tool, as a way of communicating with people, as a way of trying to build a bridge to connection, is sometimes extremely exhausting. And I thought it was just exhausting because, you might get a reaction you don't like. You might get people feasting on your most sensitive experiences with their highest level of criticism and cruelty. But even when the audience is being completely kind and nice and supportive and sweet, the energy it takes sometimes to go back in time and relive experiences that you're okay now about, you've moved on, you're all right. But if you went back for a second and just thought about it a little bit more, you might be moved to tears. Like, I was so surprised when I got to the end of that. I was like, I feel like I've been run over by a truck. This is what Brene Brown meant about vulnerability hangover. I feel like shit. I'm proud of the work, and thank you so much to people who kept watching all the way through the series. It was very clear that like it lost steam as we went on. So for those of you who have asked me if I'm going to keep Love Unsolved going, I don't know just yet, because it seems like it would be for a very small audience of my subscribers. Everybody wasn't really into it. So if and when I do decide what I'm going to do with it, I absolutely will let y'all know, because I think, there are a small group of us who like that kind of thing. But if you did watch all the way to the end, thank you. But by the time I got to the end, I was like, okay, I need to sign off for a little bit, because I'm a little exhausted. I'm exhausted. But then I saw this article. No, I'm kidding. You don't need any more of that music from me. That is the Love Unsolved music. I'm not gonna play with y'all anymore. But no, I saw this article going around last week, making its rounds. I saw people talking about it on TikTok. I saw, people talking about it on like the internet. I saw people posting about it on Threads. And as a woman who has never had a real boyfriend, yes, I was in a very, very short, horrible relationship when I was around 25 years old. But that was 16 years ago. So the concept that a boyfriend is embarrassing is an interesting idea for me, because while I will probably never have one, gotta say the probably, if you know, I think that's a reasonable conclusion to come to after you've had the life that I've had. But even though that's my reality and I'll never have one of these embarrassing boyfriends, I still don't think of boyfriends, male romantic partners, in that way. And when I saw that title, I said, ooh, I know what generation this author is from. Over time, I have noticed there being a difference in how heterosexual relationships are perceived online, how women who are partnered are related to when they come online. So not only are people judging relationships and how effective, necessary, what their impact on your life is, et cetera, but they're also judging the women that are in them. And they're judging how those women show up on the internet when it comes to being in those relationships. And I also have noticed how there's been a switch in the way that people respond to artists who talk about relationships and center the desire for love in their songs. They are being called trad wives. They're being accused of having a disappointing gender politic. And so when I saw that title, I said, this is a Gen Z author. This is a wonderful way of summarizing the way that Gen Z women are starting to look at romantic relationships that women have with men. This article is everything that I have been seeing over time. And while I don't agree, I come from a different generation. I can absolutely see where they're coming from. And I'm interested to have this explained to me a little bit more. Because I'm saying I've been seeing it, but it was great to have it explained. And there were some things I agreed with, and then there are some things I did not. But I wanted to take a moment and climb out of my vulnerability hangover. And before I go and hibernate for just a bit before hopping back online, I wanted to take a moment and comment because, again, like I said, I will most likely never have a boyfriend. Not only that, but I come from a generation where having a boyfriend was put on a pedestal. Right? I come from a generation where we had man crush Mondays, where it was, we were changing what we wanted to call our man every few days. You could be my boo. That's my bae. Love songs and music and art that centered around a woman wanting a man and desiring that for her life were the norm. Not only that, but I come from I want to say, first generation that was really impacted by the evangelical church's drive towards purity culture. I feel like evangelicism blew up in like the early 80s, with you had all the televangelists in the 80s and the 70s and maybe even before that, but I definitely know like the mega churches started around the 80s. That's what I've been told and that's what I've observed. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I'm not a scholar. You can look it up later. This is not what this video is about. But what I have noticed is that a lot of millennials who grew up with boomer parents that were coming of age and having children in the 80s and in the 90s, them kids were in evangelical churches that were pushing purity culture, and therefore marriage, relationships, boyfriends were put on a pedestal. And for millennial women, the idea that you didn't have a boyfriend, you couldn't get a man, that was something that definitely impacted your value as a human being. I come from a generation that lived through the rise of the red pill movement, that lived through the rise of men with podcasts, right? And I feel like unlike Gen Z, who maybe in high school when all that stuff was really going down. So we want to say 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, around that time, I was in the age range that men were insulting when they would get on the podcast and say, oh, how can you expect to get a high value man? You're average at best. How can you expect, look how fat you are. How can you expect, you don't have a man? You're nothing. You're a single mom. You're nothing. Like, I come from the era where having a man was not only a status symbol, but it was a survival symbol. You don't want people to attack you. You want people to respect you and take you seriously. Where's your man? So this idea, once again, coming out and saying having a boyfriend is embarrassing, to me is incredibly, it's very rebellious. It's very like shaking the table. And like I said, I may not agree, but I do appreciate a generation of women trying to look at the situation differently than my generation was taught to and often do. So let's go ahead and get into the article.
All right, I'm only going to be focusing on the things that I loved in this section of the video. So the first thing I want to talk about here is how she brought up this subject of people changing how they represent heterosexual relationships online because of a general sense of heterofatalism. I was like, what the hell is that? I had never heard that word before. And apparently, heterofatalism is just this belief that many women have gotten over time because of the terrible experiences across the board that women have been having with men, that heterosexual relationships are doomed in some way to fail. She brings up the fact that there's literally a sense of fear over leaning into that identity too much because there might be a chance that the relationship comes to the end just because it is heterosexual. I thought that that was interesting. This section of the article was interesting to me too because she brought up the writer Stephanie Yeboah, who I just heard of because she wrote an article that was titled "I Don't Want to Hear Dating Advice from Conventionally Attractive People." I had not heard of her before that article, and so I didn't know that there was at one point where she hard launched a boyfriend. I will tell you, as a reader or as a just a regular person on social media, I don't even know Stephanie Yeboah, and that impacted my parasocial relationship with her. So I'm just like these people that she ran into who, once she hard launched a relationship, they were like, oh, I'm sorry, I can't relate to you anymore. And again, like I said, I don't even know this author. I had not even seen any of her work. But when she put out that article that said, I don't want to take advice from conventionally attractive people, I posted about it in another video that I did. I felt like I knew her. So when she says, oh, but wait, in spite of all that, I've got a boyfriend, for me, I'm like, oh, pull back. You don't know her. You don't know, like, what is this? I definitely do think that your relationship status, and I'm going to talk about this later on in my video, but your relationship status absolutely affects how your audience potentially relates to you online. And I think it's interesting too that Stephanie brought up that because of how bad the dating landscape is, it can seem like you're almost rubbing it in people's faces that you were successful, even though that's not what you're doing. Final point that I want to bring out of the article here is the fact that she talks about partnered women being still feeling very connected to women who are not in relationships and having the ability to talk about partnering with men in a negative way, even when they're enjoying the benefits of it. I love how she said even partnered women will lament men and sexuality, partly in solidarity with other women, but also because it is now fundamentally uncool to be a boyfriend girl. I also want to point out here that she said that the people who called into this podcast, and I'm familiar with both of these young women. They are both Gen Z young women who are married and very wealthily married at that. But the people who called in that podcast said that a woman's aura takes a hit when she connects with a man. That is so uh, what is the word? That is so completely Gen Z and talking about someone's aura, because of the way they do it. I don't know if you guys heard about, I sound like such an old woman right now, but that just let me know that I was in their territory. I'm in their world. As an elder millennial, we did not think about things this way. So it was very interesting to me, like I said earlier, to read this article. Anyway, back to my video.
Okay, so you know what I loved about the article and what I absolutely commend her on bringing up and talking about. I think those are some very dynamic points. And like I said, I'm grateful to that generation for, or to the new generation of young women for attempting to look at things differently, because I can definitely tell you, as a millennial woman who never had that status symbol, having a boyfriend wasn't embarrassing. Having a boyfriend was everything to my generation. So I never had that status symbol. There's so many things that are boyfriendy that I never got to do, that millennials like built our houses on, metaphorically, right? I don't have the pumpkin patch picture. I can't even say the word picture. That's the vulnerability hangover. I'm hanging on by a thread. But anyway, I don't have that pumpkin patch picture. I don't have the vacation picture. I don't even have, she talked about in the article how sometimes you have a man's, his wrist and like his big sexy watch, and then your little girly hand, and you just know there was a man there. I don't even have no shit like that. I don't have the Disneyland picture. I don't have, there's so many different statuses of being a millennial girly with a man that we consider that were important. I don't have none of them. And you can forget the engagement picture. You can forget all that. I never acquired any of those things. So again, this idea that Gen Z has, which is like, okay, so what? And I want to say some members of Gen Z, because everybody ain't like this. We'll get to that in a second. But This attitude of, so what, they're embarrassing anyway. It's very freeing for me in a sense. I'm like, yeah, yeah. Even though I know if I ever met a good guy, I would be excited, but that's again most likely not going to happen. So I'd like to discuss some of the things that I have noticed over the years that the author also touched on. I mentioned these earlier in the video. One of the things I've noticed is how heterosexual relationships are perceived online within the past 2 years or so. First of all, they are perceived as a hazard to a woman's health. That is something that people are being way more open about. I saw a thread the other day and someone said, doesn't anybody want to just get up and get married and live a normal life anymore? And the comment section was filled with no. Why would any woman want to do that? Why would women want? Why would we want, if the marriage, if the commitment, if the partnership that is being talked about is a heterosexual one, it is attacked, and it's attacked a lot by women, particularly women within that window that people normally get married in. So we'll say, I don't want to say, again, that's the younger generation. So it could even be younger than that, because we still have some millennials that they're not even 40 yet. They're like 35, or I don't even know how. The generation gaps are too long. I'll say that. But anyway, so you got women who are in the age range of marriage and younger, who are like, I don't know, it doesn't sound good to me anymore. I don't know. And then we go back to a year ago, whenever people were talking a lot after the last election. People were talking a lot about the 4B movement and how it was now time for women to follow the footsteps of women in other countries like South Korea and completely cut off any type of relating and relationships to men. There were people advocating for women to break up with their boyfriends after the election last year. Break up with your boyfriend, get a divorce. No man deserves us at all. And I think that that is very interesting. And I will tell you that as a heterosexual woman who, again, most likely, but definitely can see the value in those relationships, and I know they're not all terrible, it does make me a little bit annoyed, because I do feel like we fought for so long for all communities of people, gay, straight, interracial, other members of the LGBTQ community. We fought so long for everybody to be able to love. We scream from the top of the rooftops every June, love is love. And yet heterosexual women with a desire to be in relationships with men are now being hellaciously shamed online. And again, I know where it comes from. It comes from this idea of young women wanting to put their foot down when it comes to being in relationships with their oppressor. But at the same time, every heterosexual relationship is not oppressive. And so I think instead of liberating a lot of people, what it does is it shames them. And I want to talk about that in more detail when it comes to the concept of decentering men. While I understand where this comes from, I totally get it, and I'm on board. Like, you should not. I'll tell you, this is the biggest way that I think I've decentered men in my life, like over time. I used to be a person who felt like I couldn't take certain types of trips if I didn't have a man. So when I finally, and I was 38 years old, when I could finally A, afford to do things by myself, and B, had the bravery to go and do it, right? I went and I started solo traveling in my late 30s. And it took me so long, number one, because I was broke for most of my 30s, but also because I just thought, oh, I'll do that with my husband. And I haven't always been that close-minded about doing things for myself. I eat by myself, but there were certain things that were off limits because they were for my man who never came. So for me, decentering men meant step forward and do things and stop waiting on this relationship to give you permission to live your life. For me, that's decentering men. Now, I want to say though too, on the flip side of that conversation comes a lot of judgment for still admitting that you'd be open to a partnership with a man and talking about how you still desire romantic love. Women, I feel like, are bullied, they are made fun of, and they are chastised for saying, yeah, I want a man. Why do you want that? You should focus on yourself. Why don't you love yourself? Why don't you hold hold. No amount of self love, no amount of platonic love, no amount of solo travel is ever going to take away the desire for romantic partnership. And if you like having sex with men and you happen to be a woman, heterosexual romantic partnership. Okay. And I'm speaking as a woman who has lived her entire adult life with no man, who has had to go forth. He didn't come, so I got to go forth. I got to do. So I feel like if I can say, hey, it's all right, like you can still want romantic love. Like, just don't live your life in fear. I feel like that should be the message rather than screaming at people, you said you want a man? These are men. Chill, chill. But I feel like that's the attitude now when it comes to women being in relationships with men, talking about it online instead of online really, instead of it being welcomed, instead of it being seen as okay, well, that's the norm. It's definitely criticized. People definitely go to the extreme with it, and I have noticed that, and I feel like this article touched on that a little bit, and so I just wanted to share what I've noticed. Second, and this is what's really been interesting to me, because this is definitely a Gen Z thing, this is not a millennial thing, and I feel like this is Gen Z's version of burning the bras. This is Gen Z's version of women are on birth control now. We can have sex whenever we want. This is Gen Z's version of no, we're in the workplace. We're working. We're working women now. We are working girls. This is Gen Z's version of hey, we're on the dating app. We're having sex like men. Like, I feel like every generation has had their way of questioning the relationship between the genders, and women in a way pushing back against the patriarchal expectations. And I feel, for other generations it was other things. For Gen Z, they are examining art a little bit more closely than I feel like millennials did, than I feel like a lot of generations did. The love song, singing about a love song, singing about someone you love, having a whole album of love songs has been a long held standard of certain types of music, R&B music, pop music, country music. Like, it happens, right? I have never before seen so many artists be accused of being trad wives, be accused of being I've never seen this before. And I do think that it's an extreme. And now, before I get into some examples, I want to talk about why I think that's happening. With every person that you have from this younger generation who will stand up and say, you know what? Having a boyfriend is embarrassing. Y'all can keep him. You have people who are like very, very into going back in an extreme way to trad wife, traditional wife ideals and principles. I remember when this current president was elected on the worst day of my life, November 5th, 2024, where I cried for 14 hours straight. I remember all of the posts that women were making talking about some great. Now my husband can go out and work in a great economy and I can stay home and feed our babies the way the Bible tells us to. It can finally be the way it was meant to be. And there were all kinds of women posting absolute bullshit like that. They were so excited to go back to a society where they didn't have to deal with the outside world in any way because their big, strong husband was going to be out doing it. Mind you, these were young women who had never actually lived in that society. They didn't know what it was like not to be able to get a job, not to be able to get a credit card, not to be able to rent a car, to basically be treated like a baby with boobs. They didn't know what that was like. But the ideals, the trad wife image is something that's been permeating this generation for a long time. And I think a couple years ago, you had people really start to push back against that. I think about what happened with Ballerina Farm. I'm not even going to go into it. All I will say is that this was a young woman who is a little bit older, but she represents what these young women who are in this like trad wife world think is an ideal way of living, even though she is a businesswoman. Her and her husband have a business together. She's the one that is the face of the business. I have different views about the Ballerina Farm lady, but my point is that a lot of people pushed back against her and a lot of people were like, no, we don't want this. So I feel like there's a big fight within Gen Z to be very modern, very progressive, extremely independent. And then there's go all the way back, take us back. I want to be barefoot pregnant and my kids in a one-room schoolhouse with no vaccines and no air conditioner. And it's like, can we get to a happy medium here, please? Can we be in the middle? Anyway, let's take a look at some of my examples of how art and artists are being rethought of in this new period of looking at heterosexual relationships through a different lens. The first example I have is Taylor Swift. Now, I don't have shit to say about Miss Swift. All I will say is Kayla Nicole did do her big one. If the allegations against Miss Swift, according to social media, are true regarding Miss Nicole, and that's all I will say. But I know for a fact that I listened to some of the songs that people were accusing Taylor of being a trad wife on from her new album, Life of a Showgirl. And I was like, this is light work. What do you mean? She was saying, you know, I want to get married, have some kids, have the whole block looking like you. Okay, she's saying she want her big football playing, apparently put it down in the bedroom man to knock her up as many times as he can so that they have a big family together. What I don't see what, but in a day and time and in a generation where people are starting to really look at the weight of motherhood, the threat of white supremacy. I know there were people saying she's a Nazi. She wants to have her whole block being white people. And it was like, no, girl, that's not what she's saying. She's saying she want a man to get it in, and she want to have a whole bunch of babies. I have thought the same thing before. And I think the pushback comes from having to be hyper vigilant because there's so much other negative messaging being pumped into this generation. And also they're looking at a different social landscape with a society that is stripping programs and benefits away from women, from mothers. Is it really safe to have a man knock you up as many times as possible? Is it safe to have one child? We don't know. Another example is Ray. Ray has a new song. It is so catchy. She is an incredible vocalist. And when she made a song called Baby, Where the Hell is My Husband, I just laughed because I looked up her age and I was like, that's exactly what was going through my mind when I was about 28 years old. Where the hell is my husband? The song is apparently inspired by the thing they tell all young women. He's coming, baby. He's on his way. Let him find you, girl. He's got, you know, whatever, right? And my favorite part is where she breaks it down. You know, I would like a ring, I would like a ring, I would like a ring, I'm a wedding figure, I would like a really shiny diamond so I can talk about it, or whatever she says. I love that. I love that. I don't think that that's weird. I think that's a very normal thing. For years, people would joke about going to college. Did you get that MRS degree? You know, I think it's a very normal thing for young women to want to get married and to want to know where their ring is and to want to have their moment to say, he asked, I think it's totally normal. When the song came out, here come the videos. Ugh, Ray is such a trad wife. I'm sorry, I cannot listen to that. Why is she putting marriage on such a pedestal? That is not my thing. Like it's very catchy, I'll admit, and I'm impersonating some videos here. You can Google Ray trad wife, or not Google, but TikTok. Look up in the TikTok search bar, Ray trad wife, and you can see how many young women are like, I mean, I'll sing along, but like I cannot deal with these feeling like I don't feel like this. I don't want, like, she can't only want that for her life. Like, I was singing along to it and then I realized what I was saying and I was like, oh my God, I sound so stupid. And I'm thinking, I like it. I don't know, but again, but I'm a different generation. My mind is in a different space. Last point I want to say is Beyonce. Beyonce is being criticized heavy. These young people, they love our girl, and I feel like they have been at this point she's an American institution. You know, I was in the group of people who were 12, 13 when she was coming out. I knew a world before Beyonce. Young Gen Z people today, don't know a pre-Beyonce world. They don't know it. So they've grown into adulthood listening to her songs, being told how great she is, watching her win these awards, watching her do the things that she's done in music, and basically being taught to have a respect for her. And whether or not they have that is their own thing. But a lot of her younger fans, I know, have gone back and listened to her music, and they've seen how heavily her relationship with Jay-Z has impacted her music, her life. I know me, whenever I found out about the events that led to Lemonade, I had not forgiven him. It had been 9 years and I hadn't forgiven him. And I was at the Las Vegas Cowboy Carter Night 2 show, and somebody said, "We've heard Jay-Z is going to come out." And I was like, whatever. And then Jay-Z came out and I was like this. So, you know what I'm saying? Like I actually I knew Jay before I knew Beyonce, but like that's my girl and what the fuck are you doing, you know? So, yeah, I definitely raise an eyebrow, but at the same time when I listen to the music, I'm like, you know what, if I had ever had reciprocal attraction, if I had ever met anybody and we knew and we actually acted on it and we were able to come together and really be a couple, the way that I love is represented very, very clearly by her lyrics. I resonate deeply with that. And I think that if we are honest with ourselves, there's a lot of people who have been through things in their partnerships and have chosen to go back, have chosen for various reasons. We don't know. We'll never know Beyonce's business like that. She's just not going to tell us. But I basically, hey, girl, that's you. You tell me what you're going to tell me. That's fine. That is not this generation of women. They are getting online and they're like, I can't listen to certain songs because I know it's all about that man. I know it's all about that man. So, for example, you know, they don't like this song. They don't like this song. They also don't like some old Destiny's Child songs like Cater to You. For me personally, I'm like, yeah, if I'm in love with you, that's what I want to do. Hell, if I just, yeah, that's what I want to do. You know, let me cater to you. Let me cook for you. Let me tell you happy birthday. That's my shit. That turns me on. I love to do that kind of stuff. So to hear people be like, "Oh, I can't stand that song and those old busted lyrics. What has a man ever done to deserve?" And it's like, sometimes they do good things, you know. And I'm speaking as somebody who, but I've witnessed it and I've, you know, hey. But again, it's that extreme response to pushing back against standards and expectations that they don't feel is serving them anymore. So I've noticed that. Overall, I have noticed that heterosexual love in general is not a topic that is very popular with young people today. And here's a quick astrology moment for you. I'm not a scholar. So, you know, hey, it is what it is. You know, I talked before about making sure you make content that your target audience is going to like. And as a Black woman who talks about social issues, I have two target audiences that I piss off with stuff like this. First of all, the very religious, you know, other people, Black people, very religious, very conservative. And then the very intellectual, you know, so I'll never really be taken seriously. So I just let you know, I'm not a scholar and I'm not a religious conservative. There you go. But this is just a point of observation when it comes to Gen Z versus the millennial generation. In astrology, Pluto is the sign that rules over a generation, and it rules over how that generation responds to the ways of the world and the events in the world and things and what they choose to do. And you have Gen Z, who is Pluto in Sagittarius, and you have millennials, who's Pluto in Scorpio. What does that mean? So you got millennials, very emotional, you know, emo, right? You got very loyal, quietly rebellious, secretive, sexual. Think about all of the things that we loved as far as like our art. You know, a little witchy, right? We loved Harry Potter, Twilight, you know, all that stuff. Very sexy, very witchy kind of thing. And in general, loyal and more likely to uphold tradition. And then you have Gen Z, Pluto and Sagittarius, a fire sign, similar to boomers, which were Pluto and Leo, also a fire sign. You think about all the social change and all the questioning and all the pushback of societal norms that came from the boomer generation. There's a reason why people call Gen Z the young boomers, right? They're just as pushback, they're just as advocating for societal change. And then you think about the very sign of a Sagittarius. Sagittariuses are the thought daughters. Okay, they're going to hyper intellectualize. They're going to pick things apart. They're going to criticize. They're going to satirize. I don't think I even knew what a damn video essay was until Gen Z sort of took over YouTube. Back in the day, it was all about, when it was millennial run, it was all about makeup, right? Disguise. It was all about feuds, you know, Scorpios and their competition and their fights, you know what I mean? That was very personified through millennials. If they did anything political, it was done underneath the guise of comedy, you know, quietly rebellious. Gen Z came out and they were like, let me talk to you for 4 hours about why I don't like this one episode of Friends. Let me talk, you know, very, very chatty, very conversational, very, let me grab my little microphone and start chatting away. And they overall pride themselves on independence. How can I be more independent versus being someone who is partnered with or linked to someone else? For a Sagittarius, hypothetically, your independence, your ability to move through life freely, your ability to keep collecting wisdom and experiences is more prized over your ability to settle down, to cultivate, and to connect yourself with certain things. And so you see that in the generations. You see that in how we, you know, talk about relationships. I was thinking, you know, you have millennials, let me cater to you, cause baby, this is your day. You anything for my man. Oh boy, you throw me, you blow me away, right? And then you have Gen Z, all day, every day, therapist, mother maker, to a virgin, and I heard that I've had a finger 24/7. You know, I don't know if you guys remember that song from, it was playing over and over again during the election. They're consistently reminding, hey, what's going on behind this romantic connection? What's happening behind this veil? What is the labor that we have to take on to be with these men that we're catering to? We don't think so. It's really textbook astrology here that we're witnessing in front of our eyes. So I wanted to point that out. I also wanted to talk about for a little bit when the author says, well, she talks about how having a man can hurt someone's brand online. I noticed this a few years ago that talking about relationships in a certain way would impact me as a creator. And I had already started, so I was like, damn. But I remember the summer of 2023, the rise of Shira 7 over on TikTok. Now, Shira had been around for a while, right? She had been over on YouTube. I didn't know who she was until I started seeing little clips of her show up all over TikTok. I was like, who is this lady? What is this? And I saw what she was talking about, promoting independence. If you're going to be connected to a man, don't be down bad emotionally. Make sure you be connected to him financially. And I feel like her message really, really resonated with young women of today. And I've always said, like, people ask me sometimes, they'll be like, Stephanie, would you tell your stories over on TikTok? You mean an app that's 90% or like 70, 60% majority Gen Z users? Hell no. I did a couple years ago try and share a couple little things from my past. Girl, they tore me up so bad. If you want to connect with young women today, a man can not only not be the main center point of what you're doing or whatever, because then they'll say you're male centered, you're this, you're that. But if he's in your life, he better just be a background character who slides you his credit card and his money every now and then. Like the way that male partnership is viewed as far as the impact and its effect on your subscribers, your followers, your community as a creator, is also something that has changed over the years. And the author talked about muting people when they get in relationships. And I was like, yeah, I do that because number one, sometimes it's jealousy, right? If you were single when I first started following you and now all of a sudden I see somebody in the background, I don't like that. I don't like that. But also it's about relatability. I can't relate to you anymore. So I'm going to go. And that happens a lot in real life too. A lot of the friendships and things that I've had over the years have fallen apart once somebody gets to a new status in life and we can no longer relate to each other. And I think as I've gotten older, some of my closest friends now are women who were already in relationships, already had kids when I met them, because we were always so different. So we always had to relate on something else. But when I've bonded with somebody based on the fact that we're both single girlies, we're both out here struggling with these men, and all of a sudden one day she's not, it changes it a little bit. And so I thought that was interesting. The author brought up how you have creators who will build their relationship with their audience as one thing. And then if they try and bring that man in, his role better be limited, or she better be prepared to lose her audience. So my final point that I want to make about this article and the conversations that are having around it are, what now? You've announced that having a boyfriend is embarrassing. As a generation, we can see people, you know, pushing back against the ideal that to be a whole and complete woman, you have to have one. People are being a little bit meaner to women who do have one and show up online, which is something that it didn't happen in the past. What now? What is our world now? And the author of the article posted this TikTok. She's dancing atop a ski mountain somewhere, so she apparently feels on top of the world and like she started a movement. But what is the movement? And I think it's like I said earlier, it is going to result in a generation of women, that just feel more comfortable with their independence in their own way. Like we had the sexual revolution, we had women who are more comfortable with sharing their bodies. We had women getting into the workforce in more record numbers in the 80s. We had women doing something else in the other generations. I don't know, I'm not a scholar. But then now you're going to just have women who are more comfortable with being able to say, I am not romantically partnered. Now, there's going to be a difference, though, I think, between them saying that and them actually feeling that way, which goes to my point, and this is what I'm going to close out with. Having a good relationship with the gender of the person that you desire is never embarrassing. As a 41-year-old woman who has never had that, I have definitely seen the positives of it, such as being able to have sex consistently, being able to express the romantic love you have in your heart. People talk about, oh, well, instead of focusing on your romantic relationships, focus on your platonic. I don't know how many times I've had to distance myself over the years from a woman who thought I was her damn man. I'm not your man, girl. Listen, and we could talk about that if you want to. Okay. Sometimes you need a romantic ass partner. The energy that you feel is not platonic. There are, I think, platonic ways to touch your friends, platonic ways to hug your friends, platonic requests to make of your friends. And then there is romantic. It's two different types of loves. I think people who are successful in life or who are living a really full life have access to both of those energies if they want them. I also think that while I can respect this generation's push to challenge things and to move into adulthood in the way that they see fit and the way that they see serves them, I don't think that it's necessarily organic. I think it is just. I think it's a way of things will come back around. Things always come around to the center over time. If we look at the once again going through the decades that I brought up, you look at the sexual revolution. Eventually, people were like, "Yo, we may need to calm down. Let's calm down. Yes, birth control is great, but maybe I don't need to have 8 partners in one night. Let me calm down." You look at women rushing to get in the workforce because we can have it all. Well, actually, it's kind of exhausting trying to be a mom and do this and do that. Is there any way I can have a gig where I can? Let me see if I can work something out. I think with all things in life, you need balance. And I think looking at heterosexual relationships in this extreme negative way is not balanced. It might be fun, it might seem liberating, but it's not balanced. And so it's inherently an unhealthy way of thinking about your own humanity, in my opinion. I wanted to comment on this little article, and now I did. Have you read it? What do you think? Do you think having a boyfriend is embarrassing? I will absolutely check comments and read things when I return to my channel, most likely in 7 days. So thank you, and have a wonderful week.